song fires me up every time.
Let's finally do it. It's December 10th, the year 2020, that we will soon forget, hopefully, as quickly as possible. This is the Crushing Iron Podcast, and you are listening to episode 433.
Okay.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Sure. Sounds
that works
good.
for me.
Works for me, too. We appreciate you tuning in. If it's your first time joining us, hello there. Stick around. We will negative split this podcast and bring you a lot of high knowledge entertainment towards the end, but we'll start it off nice and slow. That's a huge promise.
That's a huge.
I tend to try and
I know.
I try to undersell.
Not much coming today.
Yeah, this is going to be terrible, but please, thank you and stick around. But no, we appreciate you tuning in. We know you have a lot of options in the podcast universe, especially those that are triathlon related, and that's what we are. We are a triathlon related podcast. We talk about it all: swim, bike, run, nutrition. Well, rarely ever transitions, but we do race recaps, we do race previews, have the occasional guest. For the most part, Mike and I, as best friends, coaches, and athletes, sit back, relax, have a nice, enjoyable conversation that leads somewhere, and talk about it all. We try to keep everything balanced in terms of life and triathlon. That's how we want you to look at things too. You know, triathlon is a wonderful sport. It can sometimes fall in a different category in life. Sometimes we put too much emphasis on it and how it makes us feel and what we try to get out of it, but that's the most part we do is just try to sit back and, you know, share our experiences, our successes, our failures, and hopefully if we can let you avoid them as much as possible. What are you laughing at right now?
I'm just in a good mood, man.
I can see he's had 3 cups of coffee
You're talking
in a row.
about balance, and it was good to see you kind of balance out your music taste today. I mean, for a while there, it was kind of
I listened to a lot. You know,
I know, but
we also are 40 years apart. So, I mean, we have like a very different,
hey,
you know, it was Mike made it very clear this morning. He walked in and we had an athlete come in and use our, whatever, you know, let me finish my intro. Thanks for joining us. Tune in. We had an athlete come in and that we work with and worked out with here in our training center in Chattanooga. And we were starting talking about like the music that we grew up on. I immediately went to like, you know, when I felt like music originally hit me hard was when I was in 8th grade. So like 93, 94, it was Nirvana, it was Pearl Jam, it was Soundgarden, it was Stone Temple Pilots, it was 311, it was Offspring. That was my jam. It's Smashing Pumpkins. So I was like, man, like let's turn on. He was about to do a bike workout, and I was like, let's turn on let me go hop on Pearl Jam Pandora and let's rock it out. And ever since then, it's all been listened to. And like it's been such a walk down memory lane. And it also does like how insanely crazy your brain is. Like that I haven't heard those songs in some of them like 10 years, yet I can sing every word of them. And you remember everything. You remember the beats when like the music would play in, and you walked in this morning, you're grabbing a cup of coffee and you're like, I'm really liking the new music taste you got going on. I was like, and he said it in a way that was like, what I'm trying to tell you is I didn't like the previous music, because I think he said it 3 times. He was like, yeah, I'm just really liking the new music that you're playing right now. You know, it's like somebody changes their style of clothing and their haircut, and you're like, you look much better. Like, you're like, you look finally a lot better. Finally coming around. So yeah, we've been rocking out to some 90s alternative rock, which is something that will never be replicated. And if you are a youngster and you have no idea who those bands were, well, then we're not the podcast for you anyway. Go find somebody else. Yeah. Or go back and listen and educate yourself. But it's always good fun to go back and rock
People
down
are that
memory
young that
lane.
they don't know Nirvana. That was like my 4th musical awakening, the Nirvana.
Yeah, exactly. It was my first, and it was your 4th, so that's why we're a little
Led Zeppelin into Prince and like hip hop rap in the 80s, and then I went into like sort of that 80s sound, and then it started going. I couldn't deal with it anymore. The 80s. It's kind of fun to reflect on the 80s, but a lot of that was like really kind of getting soft, frankly, like the music you listened to before.
You act like I'm listening to like Nirvana slow dance music in here. Like I like all kinds of
sort of Creed meets modern day or something.
Oh my God, you're just making shit up.
I don't know. It's just fun to talk about.
I feel the same way.
We have an age gap, and sometimes I'm like not
a massive
up with
age gap.
You know, I forgot to put in. I started with Lawrence Welk and Bing Crosby, and then I went into Led Zeppelin. So I've gone all over the board, really.
Well, that's not our fault. You're that old. Anyway, back into
trying to stay young,
back into
Nirvana.
Yeah, I got you, man. I'll rock it out the rest of the day, and maybe tomorrow then I'll peel back the layers and put some more slow jams back on just to make to tick you off.
What is that stuff?
I had it on Advanced Joy Radio, which I'm Advanced Joy. I like Mumford and Sons. I like Mansfield. I like those bands. I like everybody. I don't like everybody. I like for the most part. I'm well-rounded.
Yeah, you are. I'll give you that.
I'm a well-rounded fella. But hey, here we are. We're back. We're going to focus on triathlon at least for a little bit, or maybe a little bit of life. But we were talking before the podcast about where we wanted to go today. And I was reminded last night, in looking back at, this time of year is important. Like we just sent out a survey to our athletes, the 2021 planning in terms of what races do you want to do? What are the most important things you want to accomplish this year? And then that kind of helps us, navigate and plan how we hope their year could look like in terms of, hours spent training and how we want their blocks to look. And obviously those are all just tentative because as we've all learned this year, you can only plan so much before you have to race it all and start over. And like everyone has like crumpled up paper next to like an empty trash can in their corner. That was probably their week of training this year. But we were having a conversation last night with another coach who was in town. We were just talking about he did Challenge Daytona, and we had a bunch of athletes do Challenge Daytona as well, and had a lot of really solid performances. And we were talking about how a lot of people think that like the answer is always more. How like people would probably be surprised at some of the volume that people don't put in terms of not because they're not working hard, but because they're working smart, right? And so I think it's a common misconception athletes have, especially when they're looking at tackling or moving up in distance. Do I want to tackle a 70.3? Do I want to tackle a full distance this year? It's like, how many hours is that going to take? Because you see pros and the hours that they put in, they do it for a reason because it's definitely it's a different ball game. But then you also see, your friends or your buddies who may, subscribe to a different method or their coach works in a different way. They're doing, they're starting to do century rides, 8 months out from their race or whatever. And that was one of the things I remember when we had, who was it? It was a basketball player we had on from Wisconsin.
Oh, Zach.
Yeah. He was training for Ironman Wisconsin. And he was already doing like 3.5 hour 4-hour rides in December. And I was like, holy smokes, that's like a little early for those longer ones. But I think that's just a common thing that when athletes look at, especially if they're new to the sport or depending on who their friends are or the news or the articles that they consume, they think that Ironman training is always going to be this like 18-hour, 22-hour grind of, 4-hour runs and, 20-mile runs or 100-mile rides and 10-mile brick workouts that you look at and you think, how can that be good for me? That's going to destroy me. And even like 70.3 racing, this was how the discussion kind of led last night. I was like, I guess he was probably at like 10 to 12 hours and he was up in like the 4-hour range. We had a guy as well that probably averaged this year but only between like 10 to 12 hours, weekly coaching. He was in the 404 for 70.3, which is a very, very, very high level age group, time. And I think some people think, oh, well, they probably train 25 hours a week, because you see a lot of age groupers that actually do probably train more than some of the professionals because they are obsessed with it in that kind of a way. And so I think it's a good time of year to have that discussion as people look at the races that they want to do or not do, and then the time commitment that's going to happen, or that kind of coincides with that commitment, and that there's a lot of ways to be successful. And and a lot of things is more, I don't want to say more always better. It can accumulate into making you a better athlete depending on how you do it. But if you aren't balancing the other areas of your life well and creating more stress and being more overwhelmed and creating these really high expectations and really this addiction of more that I think most triathletes have, is that like, oh, well, if I have 35 minutes on my schedule, then 40 minutes is better. Or if coach gives me 10 intervals and 12 is better. Like that's always a thought. I mean, we've referenced it a couple of times before. It's like, you always want to look for the minimal effective dose to give an athlete and prescribe them, because most athletes, and I mean, I've learned this over, 15 years of coaching, is that most athletes, you don't like your number one thing isn't to, push them forward. It's to rein them in and to make them not work as hard and just to work smarter, not necessarily harder, because most athletes are wired to be type A and always do more and more and more and more and faster. And that's how you get burned out and you actually overtrain or hurt yourself and you actually will plateau and never peak. And so that, I think it's just a good conversation to have this time of year. People look at how they want the year to lay out, especially if they're a self-coached athlete. I think it's a good conversation that more is not always better. It's always about minimal effective dose. And that's what coaching is. You looking at, doctors, same thing. They're not like 50 milligrams is enough for what you need. but they're not going to be like, that means probably 100 milligrams, probably better, because then you give what is enough and to elicit the response and the adaptation that you want. It's not, 45 minutes for Mike today is probably perfect, but 55, that'll get just enough more. When usually the tricky part is when you kind of seesaw between what's perfect and what's too much, because then you go from perfect stimulus, perfect session, appropriately planned or challenging to this was too much. And on the next 2 or 3 days, you've regressed or you have to rest. Therefore, the workout you just did wasn't a positive. It ends up being a negative.
God, man.
And we got all that from Nirvana.
Yeah. See? Like how much Nirvana is too much, right? No, but I think that that's a question that really applies to life in general. Like if we can talk about drinking, for example, it's like you have a few beers, you feel perfect, and you're like, man, I feel perfect, but I want to feel more perfect or whatever. So I think it's sort of like an analogy that you can use. I mean, whether it's like sometimes like right now I'm going through this hot water with lemon thing, just drinking that, trying to drink that more often. And it feels good. I feel like it's a good thing for your digestive system and all that kind of thing. But like, I'm always in this mode of like, should I have another one? Should I have another one? And I think that it goes the other way, and it can kind of like it turn the wrong way. But
it's like coffee. 1 cup or 2 is probably good enough, and then your third and fourth, you're like, I'm crashing. I should
feel
not be
weird.
Exactly. So you got too much.
So I think that is the thing, right, with everything that we deal with in life. And it's always been a thing with me and actually Derek mentioned it last night. It's like he doesn't like the long rides, and I've never liked the long rides. But I think, obviously, I know. It's like, so what? What can you do? I don't know. I think that I've done Ironman. My best Ironman ride was based on a 3.5 hour trainer ride. Was my longest ride. So I know there's something in there, and I think a lot of it is. I think I started that process too late, though. So to your point, I was like, starting in December for a race that's next November or October or something, it might be a little early to be doing that kind of stuff. But like, if you can kind of consistently do stronger middle range kind of rides and things like that, I think it might be good. But man, it is, man. It's like, how far are you going to push this thing?
Well, I think like
every day.
To your point, and yeah, you've never been a long ride guy. I don't know that you'll ever be a long ride guy. Although I did see you hop on a treadmill last week, so hell does freeze over. And then we went to speaking of like you were hating my music choice. We went to dinner last night. Like, yeah, what can you drink? I was like, I say Clips. You're like, yeah, I'll take a hot tea. And then they brought you this like extravagant hot tea platter, and I was like, yeah, there you are, showing your age, but. I think one of the when we talk about maturity, wisdom. When we talk about minimal effective dose, I think you didn't necessarily refer to, but I think it's worth pointing out is that to me as a coach, like when you look at minimal effective dose, and what we mean by that is like the least amount of work you can put in to get the maximum amount of effect. Is a 4 hour ride, best, or is a 4.5 hour ride better, or is a 4.5 hour ride too much going to make it worse? And I also think when you think of it in terms of like getting the most out of a person with the least you can do, it's not about being lazy. It's about being precise and specific. But it also comes back to what that athlete can probably handle mentally and emotionally. If you already know out of the gate, an athlete like yourself doesn't like long rides and that they hate them or they just despise them or they just don't necessarily look forward to them like they look forward to like a 3 hour ride, well, you're going to be in a really bad position and risk not necessarily physical burnout or overtraining, but mental and emotional detachment from wanting to do it, which causes, drops in energy, drops in motivation, which is going to mean they're not going to do the work. It's like how that's why I'm always a huge fan of, and always have been, very short Ironman blocks. Like you get in really, really good 70.3 shape. And then because for most people, like there's only so much their body can handle anyway before they just kind of plateau and they're like, yeah, we're not going to get much better. You just kind of got what we got. And people just do that for longer. They just practice getting more tired. But it's also
practice getting more tired. I like that.
It's like, but if you look at it in terms of like how you schedule out someone's year, it's like, well, when are we going to start Ironman training? 20 weeks out, 18 weeks out, 16? No, like maybe 8 to 10 max, from depending on how well you've done before that, obviously. But for an athlete that looks out there, think, oh, I can do that. Like I can focus for 8 to 10 weeks. But when you ask them to focus for 16 or 20 they're like, God, that's a long time. Like, I can't really get engaged. So you have to also look at it from an engagement factor, how they're going to be mentally and emotionally motivated and energized and ready to do the work that you put out for them. Because if they're not, it doesn't matter what happens. If you can put out the perfect training schedule, but the athlete doesn't do it, they're not energized to do it, it doesn't matter. It's worthless, right? Yeah. And so, if you, I think that's the happy, the happy balance you have to find with athletes is that their physical minimal effective dose, and obviously if some athletes that just want to do more, they just love running. They want to say like, okay, well, if you're going to run that much more, do you want to, have your best performance, or when you're going to get burnt out and not like it anymore? So you have to kind of massage all three of those at once to find everyone's kind of, not happy medium, I guess, but that sweet spot, I guess, is per se of like where they are always engaged and ready to attack. And then right at the last moment, you're like, all right, let's get fresh right before. Because like to me as a coach, like if they are really tired and kind of like not really tired, but if they're a little bit tired, that's a combo of fatigued and tired. If they're a little bit tired, like the first week of their taper, and they're kind of down, then to me, in my experience as a coach, that's actually a good thing, because we went right up to the last point to where if we'd have trained one more week, then we would have been done. Like we would have been overtraining.
Oh,
so to me, it's like their body's recovering, their body's adapting, they're starting to see things. And then they've been like the next, 10 to 14 days recovering. They're just little signs like that each athlete show. And they do is they show that actually during training, like during their regular weeks, like what's too much, what's too often, what's too daunting, and how that fits in with your life. And it's just something that has to be worked through, and you don't really know it until you find it. And that's part of, the great part of coaching, but also the difficult part is that it's not something you figure out overnight. It's not like, oh, you're Mike Trout, you're probably a 12-hour perfect guy. You have to find it, and you have to look at like, week to week to week, did they respond well to this? Okay, well, let's keep doing that until, because coaches, we're wired the same in a lot of ways. Your first thought is always like, well, if you were able to, see this increase in percentage and your, sustained power of 60 or 90 minutes over this block, well, then I wonder what doing more of it could do, but that's not necessarily the answer. Like as a coach, the hardest thing to do, and same thing with the athlete, is to show restraint, because you see things that are working and you're like, okay, well, I need to keep touching it. I need to keep making it better. But the best thing you can usually do is just take your hands off and be like, well, if this is working now, then take your hands off and let it keep working, and do the same thing and the same thing and the same thing until the body says, hey, psst, hello, coach, I see what you're doing. It's not working anymore. And then you kind of start plateauing. Then you're like, okay, now we got to change it up. And then you look back and you see, all right, what did I learn from that build that I can now reconstruct this next one to get the same response, but in a different way?
I think it's really interesting what you're saying about how Derek and Sam at Daytona probably peaked around 10 to 12 hours or whatever like that. We don't know. I mean,
average probably 10 to 12 hours.
Yeah. So, but when you start thinking about Ironman training, I don't think about like doubling that. You know what I mean? Like the thought of me doing 24 hours in a week. I mean, I'm sure a lot of people may do that or whatever, but to me, that doesn't, like, it's back to the minimal effective dose. It doesn't, to me, double your chances of doing good. I think that there's a lot to be said for this idea of like really, because like what are you saying there? Sort of like if you're in really, really good 70.3 shape, then the leap to Ironman, at least a successful Ironman, isn't that much, right?
Yeah, we also have to look at speed, right? It's like how,
well, that's what I mean. Like
how quickly can they cover the distance? It's like that's like one of always the biggest things with athletes. Like, oh, well, these guys are averaging 50 to 55, 60, 70 miles a week, and I'm like, yeah, they run 6-minute miles. They're probably running less, or could be even running less overall time duration, because they cover distance significantly quicker than you. Doesn't mean, because if you look at like people that are, because everyone likes to compare, like, oh, well, so-and-so is running, 60, 65 miles a week in their training. Like, well, they're also running, 9 miles an hour, right? You're running 6.5. So if you multiply it out, then like you're telling me that you're not as durable or accomplished or as seasoned as so-and-so athlete that can do that pace and has been doing it for 10 or 12 years, and they're only doing a volume hour-wise and duration, which is the stress in the body, of 5.5, 6, 7 hours of running. But if you multiply it out and to what your speed would be, then you're telling me you should be running 10 hours a week, because your body only knows stress, right? And it's how you manipulate the stress, and how you that's like one of the hardest things to do about coaching is like because that's what you do is your job. If you think about it that way, it's kind of weird to think about it, but your job is to appropriately manage and dose stress, because you're stressing an athlete to make their body adapt and get better. And so it's not so much always like how much stress, it's more oftentimes it's the when. When is the best day? What is the best session to stress them the right way on the right day that gets the best response, that is just enough to get them there, but not enough to, it's like, I want them to have the same response to 1 cup of coffee, not 4. Because then it's a negative. Because then after 4, you get the crash and you're just kind of feeling down. You don't feel good about it. Your stomach was probably messed up and you're just fatigued and tired the rest of the day. So you just totally missed the boat, right? But it's that restraint of 1 was perfect. Do I really need 2? Maybe another half cup max just because I want to, but is 2 going to be too much? Sure, then you regret it and you end up, probably doing it again the next day and you repeat the cycle. But that's what training is. It's you're loading stress, to an athlete. And again, like I know it's kind of odd to think of it that way, but that's just, what we do. So you have to be very careful. And that's why you always have to also manage how the athletes, like where they are mentally and emotionally with life. Like, especially like this year was one of a huge, again, like every year's a learning curve and learning experience of growth. But this year is just like how you were managing athlete stress in life, that we all had this kind of, blanket, stress level that was, isolation and quarantines and masks and, a pandemic and worrying about things and the news and the election. It was like, there's never been a year that I've coached in where it seems like there was always this like underlayer standard baseline of like stress and anxiety for people, and people can't perform as well with that. Or let me rephrase, you can't ask an athlete to be as stressed and as much in their physical life and their training and their triathlon world as you could normally, because for most people, for a lot of people this year, it was their emotional and mental, normal, personal, professional life. The stress was way high. So it's not a ratio where you're like, oh, well, you're super stressed. Well, those are different. So I can still ask the same. I had to really scale things back for a lot of athletes. But what that also did this year was it also allowed me to figure out a few things about certain athletes that were like, okay, well, if you're more life stressed and we did less and you still perform really well, is the answer you're a minimal dose responder, or is it that we got the stress level right? Because if your life is perfect and you can handle more, is that going to be better? Because stress is stress, and your body, we've all been tired. This year, it's like, you're just like, the whole year just kind of gets to you. So it's something that always has to be monitored, and that's why it's so, I think, difficult for athletes that work off a training plan or that self-coach to monitor their own stress and then apply their own stress while also being objective to not comparing or expecting what they wanted to get out of the gate, and be like, I understand that today's probably needs to be a day off, but God, I just need to do this and it makes sense. But a lot of times it's actually a bad thing. Like, you'd have been better off going to sleep and waking up the next day and reducing your stress level than doing a workout that's gonna put your stress over the top. Like a 30-minute run, that's not gonna put your stress over the top. It's probably gonna be a good thing. But if you're a person saying, well, this 2-hour trainer session is gonna absolutely be what I need at 9:30 at night, and then you wake up the next day at 5 o'clock and you're shelled, you're like, that was probably a net negative versus a net positive.
Let me ask you this, because you said something earlier about, if you got a 45-minute workout or run or something and you're like, 55 is going to be perfect, right? If you go into that workout with that mindset that you need to do 55 or something, then that doesn't really seem to make sense to me. But if you're in a workout, like, I'm just throwing this out, like, as in, I don't like 5-6 hour bike rides, but if I have a lot of 3-hour rides scheduled or whatever, on some days I think it has to be on the athlete a little bit, in the sense of like, when are the opportunities for you to go? Like, if we're not consistent with our diets and sleep and all that stuff, then that stuff adds up on us. But if we are, for some reason, and you go out and I'm going to do a 3-hour ride or whatever, and I think in the middle of it, shoot, I could go 5. I feel like I got 5 in me today. Maybe that's an opportunity to go 4 or whatever. You know what I mean? Like, if I just feel like we talk about being able to recognize that fatigue and if it's the right thing to keep going or whatever, but sometimes your body's saying, yeah, I got more in me, but I don't think you go to fail. You know what I mean? I think there's a opportunity there maybe to hit that set a little bit harder than maybe normal. Like if you're feeling it, like I think those are interesting training situations too, because you know, if we're always just trying to hit like our minimal numbers or what have you, but there's always opportunity, I think. And I think as you're training for this race here, I think there was a couple of days when you were like, man, I felt good today. And I really kind of pushed it a little bit, but those are like, for me, they're few and far between, but they're there. And to me, those are the opportunities to find growth. Like when your body's ready for it, you know?
You bring up a great point. It's a constant, I guess, ongoing education or growth, and just like your overall awareness of like who you are and what you are. And like there were times when, there were a couple of times where I got on the bike where I was supposed to ride easy, and I was like, I'm gonna see what my legs have today, and they felt incredible. And I was like, now's the time, where it was like, I'm gonna absolutely smash it. And I did. Like one day I went, but I also had to be there mentally and emotionally. And I ended up doing I think I ended up doing that was the day I did a 60-minute like FTP test. Like I did like the standard, like 60 minutes all out, just music, not watching anything. But I was in the zone that day and absolutely shattered like anything I would have thought I could have done. But then on the flip side, 2 weeks later, I think I came here and told you, like, how's it right? And I was like, it was good. I almost went 30 more minutes, but I hopped off the bike and called it quits. I knew I could do it, but I just felt intrinsically, and it comes with experience. It comes obviously like experience as a coach and an athlete as well. And I kind of know it. I feel like I know my body really, really, really well, really well. And I was like, 30 minutes, it wasn't going to do anything. It would have made me maybe mentally and emotionally feel better. Like, see, you did do it, but physically it wouldn't have done anything. It wouldn't have made me a faster athlete or a better athlete or created a better stimulus. And I think that's like the balance that athletes have to try to find, especially if they're being self-coached, is like, is that extra 30 minutes or is that extra hour, or is that extra 4 miles, or those extra intervals, are those going to make you better, or are those going to make you feel better? And that is a really, really fine line. And when I mean feel better, I mean like, is it going to reaffirm my psyche that I can do this? Or I am strong enough, or I am ease your conscience, if you will, or quiet your ego. It's like, those are the questions you have to ask yourself. Is like, but is it, always ask yourself is like, but is it necessary? Is it really necessary to achieve the goal that I want to achieve? And usually the answer is no. It's like, we always tell athletes, like when they're doing races, like from the moment the gun goes off, always ask yourself before you make, or when you're trying to make a decision, is this going to negatively or positively affect my ability to run my best half marathon or marathon, or from mile 20 to mile 26? And if the answer is no, it's not going to help it, then you don't do it. Like it's a very simple triage to go through, and that should be the same thing with training. Is this going to help or hurt my next day's session? Is this going to make me better, or does it make me feel better? And I think those are very important questions for athletes to ask themselves.
And when you're talking about those guys training for 10 to 12 hours on 70.3 distance, and you're going to be going the distance a lot in training. But you don't do that in Ironman, like especially, you do on the bike sometimes. I just think it sort of pops up, especially with guys that are faster, women that are faster. It's just like they'll hit more like of the actual race distance or close to it more often. But we all think that when training for Ironman that has to be the case too. But a lot of times that really is not going to, benefit you necessarily. It's just more about, to me, it's more about understanding effort and more about building up the ability through accumulated fatigue and training to know that you can do it. And you just, like you said, it's like we can't spend our whole time training trying to convince ourselves that we can do it. We have to just sort of like believe in the mystery and know that deep down that we have the ability. Because frankly, look at most people have that sort of question mark in their head, especially their first Ironman, right? It's like, I've never done the distance. Can I do it? And I think part of what we're always trying to do is like, of course you can. Like most people do it.
Sebastian Kienle, in the year that he won, let's say 2016, maybe 2017, the year that he won Kona, when he was debating on not even starting like 2 days beforehand. he has this quote that he says, if you come into an Ironman and you have no doubts and you're totally confident you can do it, you're overtrained.
Interesting.
Because that is the thing. Like when you have athletes that race and they get down there and like, I have no idea how I did that or that I was that fast. And you're like, good, because you weren't supposed to. Not until today. And that's the restraint. And that's also the trust and the confidence you have to have in your own training or your coach's plan is that like, I get it. Like I don't have to see it. It's like faith. It's like you have to have faith that what you're doing is working. I don't need to see it until it matters. Because if you try to take a peek at it, or try to stare at it, or try to see it really often, then you're never going to have the full picture on race day. You have to just believe that it's working and then just be able to see it and let it rip on that one day. And you should be able to run, like we had in Daytona, we had four of these 6 athletes run their best open half marathon time in the race by like minutes and minutes, but we never even ran close to that in training. But if they had been like, oh, I'm going to go out today and I want to really see if I can do this, then the race day probably wouldn't have ended up okay, because you only got a couple of those matches burned. You got only a couple of those peep shows, in terms of like training.
That they didn't do close to that kind of pace in
not
training,
even close.
I'm sure they approached the distance of.
Sometimes sometimes less. It depends on like overall volume and like how you want to, dose the stress. But a lot of times, the duration of the runs were longer because they were running a little bit slower and easier. Like they might do a 2-hour run, but then they're going to go run a 1:34. So they're not on their feet as much, but it affects everything else in a positive way. But that's the thing is like, I think guys are really are terrible at this, especially on the bike, but it also shows up on their bike when they go and race. Like, it's, I want to see it. And like, do you really, do you need to see it or do you need to know it? And again, like that goes with every training session that we do and how you look at how things link together in a positive way, not that they take away, like, the training that you do should never look unpaired or look like this is going to negatively affect the next day. It should all kind of make sense, or it should make sense when you get on the bike and you're like, all right, I can tell why this is like this today. Like I can see why this is an easy ride, today. It makes sense. It shouldn't be like, I have to force it because I want to see it today. And that's what happens when your body's usually like, oh, no. You're going to have one of those like epic burn sessions to where like you crumble and you bonk like 30 minutes in. You just have to know your body. And you also have to be okay and say, because just as much as I'll say that like that day that I went out and I had like one of my best rides in probably like 3 or 4 years, the shorter one, I think 2 days before that I hopped on and I was like, I wonder if I've got it today. Because I wanted it. And my body was like, no, thank you. And I was like, all right, pull it back and just deal with it. Be like, this is how the day is going to go. You just have to really respect and understand your body and be aware of it and just disregard. Numbers don't matter, right? It's like numbers and heart rate, they matter nothing if you don't know your body, because all the numbers tell you are what your body's really trying to say, with a mixture of what you want to do, but only for a certain amount of time. Like if you're wanting to do 220 watts for an hour and you start out at 220 and your mind wants to do it, then you're probably going to hang out 220, but eventually your body's going to tell you that this isn't a good idea today. And you're going to drop to 215 and 210 and 205 and 5 at 37 minutes and 28 seconds. And you're like, I didn't have it today. I bailed. And what you could have done is been like, let me see what my body is telling me it can do today, and cruise at 180 watts for an hour and a half, 2 hours like I should have done. And look, now I'm better off the next day and been able to kind of like check the boxes.
So what you're talking about is control, right? The ability, I think this is probably one of the most underrated parts of training for triathlon, is the ability to control and understand what that means, as far as, because I think a lot of us get on the, when I'm in a groove, I'll get on the trainer and know exactly what's going to happen that day. But like in this particular situation of my life, when I'm not in very good shape and I haven't been training much, it's like when I get on that bike, it sort of feels like I'm getting on there to do a workout and it's going to be hard no matter what right now, but you get on and you're like, hey, I got an easy zone 1, zone 2 ride. You know what that means. That's just going to be like, you're totally in control of that. Like I went out yesterday, I ran 20 minutes. How about it? Felt good about that.
But you swam too.
And I swam, and both of them were super in control. And it was interesting because, man, when you're not in good shape and you're out there trying to get back in with running, it's kind of deflating, because that, I wasn't even running at the pace that I ran my last Ironman at, but I knew that was my pace that I could control. And in my mind, I'm thinking, well, I could probably go for a long time on this, but I didn't because I'm trying to build it up. But I guess the point is like, I had enough discipline in my mind to be like, just don't look at that, you know, just kind of go at a pace where I was like, oh, I could probably today, if I had to, you know, suck up a half marathon at this pace. It's an interesting thing, you know, because like mentally I could do that. And it's sort of like what you know, when you, I feel like when you get better at racing, you start, at least this has been my experience, controlling the race more as you go, right? Like you're not, like you can finish it like in a crazy, you know, sort of like out of control way and do it, but like you become a better racer when you like articulate the whole race the way that you want to, and you're in that moment and you know, like it's not time yet to start, you know, flailing the arms about and really, you know, just giving it everything you got. You know, there's time and place for that. But I guess what I'm saying is like, yeah, you can get out there and finish these races, and I believe most people can do it, but like the educational part or the growth part is in the understanding and being in control from the minute you get in that water to, you know, the end of the run when you just have to kind of like let things go. If you get to that point, and it's just a series of stages of controlling your effort and being able to.
And for the most part, like most sessions that you do, what you see is irrelevant to what you see when you're done. You know, if you need to ride easy, then so many athletes literally stare at the watts they're doing or their heart rate the entire time.
Yeah, right.
Like you know what easy feels like. You know what moderate feels like. Like do that, and then the numbers will just be what they are based on how you were riding, not you're riding to a number. Your numbers are to how you're riding. You know, and people don't look at it that way. They look at it a different way. They're always about what's the number say, what's the number say, what's the number say. I should go slower, I should go faster. Like
you stiffen up.
None of it matters until you're done. You know, it should be all you should care about, honestly, for most sessions, unless they're like very specific and interval, you know, specific, is like you should just care about the summary. You know, like of how you did and how you felt. It's just a spit out of like, you know, I would much rather that, you know, athletes like have to run with a watch, you know, on that has no data fields, no screen, can still pick up all the information you want to pick up on it, but it's just blank. It's just a model watch. And they go do your 40-minute run. It keeps the time for you. Then lets you know when to go back home. They come back home. They're done 40 minutes, and they walk in, and you know they have to write down on Training Peaks, you know, like how they did, and then that's when they get to find out their pace and their heart rate and their how they went. And then they can be like, oh well, that makes sense. That's just what I have for the day. I think it would change how athletes see their training and how they, you know, how little you have to obsess about what your current pace is, especially if you even own a GPS watch, you know that like you can just look at like it a split second might say like 10:13, then you know go under a building, you cross over, and now it says like 7:20, like you know, but that changes your mindset of how I'm going too fast, so I got to speed up.
I still got it.
You change your body, you know, based on, you know, what your watch says. It just there's so much awareness and understanding that has to go into an already complex sport, you know, with three different disciplines that are very, very different from each other. You have to do them in succession. You have to be able to train them in the right way to do them, you know, as best you can on race day at varying distances and varying speeds over different terrain and different conditions. You have to nail nutrition while you do it. It's like there's so many moving parts and puzzle pieces that are required, you know, to do it. And that's why it makes it daunting. And sometimes that's why you can get lost in really understanding where you are and who you are with your training and that level of awareness of what's really, really best for me today. And I love that when you read, like you'll read an athlete's, you know, a Training Peaks comment, and they'll think like, and they'll cut it short, you know, maybe 5 minutes, you know, like, cause you know, something came up and their life is stressed, or they're like, you know what, that seemed just about right for today. Good. I'm not gonna be like, you should have finished out 5 minutes more because that's what it said. No, kudos to you. You are finally learning and understanding your body. Now, if they're like, I always love this one. My legs just wanted to go fast today, coach. I'm like, no, you didn't. Your legs have a brain. Okay, you have a brain. Your brain was like, I want to run fast today. So you wanted to run fast today, not your legs. It's one of my favorite things to read. Sorry, coach. Legs just wanted to run today. No, they didn't. Your legs don't have brains, okay? Your legs ran because your ego or you wanted to. Let's just like get that straight out of the way. But I love it when athletes are like, yeah, I just felt good today. Like I felt good, and this seemed like enough. For Tim, like, then good. If you feel like enough, then you should feel empowered to make those decisions. And very rarely is it like, oh, 20 minutes all out seemed like a good idea today. Like that's really ever never like something that someone says. It is, but you have to be in the sport for a long time. You have to pay attention to it. You have to make sure you're doing it in the right way, and you have to leave the wiggle room in your life with the other things you're trying to manage with professional and personal stress to, place or replace physical stress with something else, whether it's rest. It's like, hey, your life is already at its max stress-wise. I can't add on 4 more hours of training this week and expect you not to crumble, right? Because your body only knows stress. That's what it absorbs. And so it's all very different. They're all interlinked or locked a different way. And that's why each person is very, very different in how you have to even communicate with them or change things or adapt things, because everyone's life is different, everyone's training is different, everyone's goals are different, everyone's ability is different. It's all different, and it's also a moving target. It's like it's not always a set target. People's lives change. People's get fitter, and their bodies are also like, hey, this worked for me today, and it's not going to work for me tomorrow. So you have to be kind of on the ready to recognize those things.
All right. So let me ask you this. I want to ask a specific question. You remember when I was talking about the draft, 20-meter draft at Daytona, and how I felt like that could be a hidden stress on a cyclist to maintain that distance and not drop back, but not, so what that reminded me of was like lately when I get on that Watt bike, right? So there's got all the controls and all the stuff on there, and you can see like every stroke, like how much power you're putting into the left pedal versus the right. And I have this tendency to start thinking about that, right? And like getting like you're saying, you look at the screen, is like, I got to keep. So like, let's just throw out a zone 2 ride, for example. And as a coach, what's the perfect looking zone 2 ride? Because I would just imagine, like, this happens to me when I'm watching it, and I'm like, I got to keep. Let's just say it's 130 power or something, and I'm like, there's a thing that creeps into my head, and I assume it's like, I'm a human, so I assume that everybody does this, but it's like a perfect ride today would be is like if everything stayed at 130, right? Like just to be right there. So like when I think in terms of being free and flowing and going easy and stuff like that, that's not how I really think about it. There's going to be little surges here and there or whatever, but like sometimes I'll see somebody, like some of the better cyclists that I work with in the club right now, they'll, ramp it up to a certain number, then it hits a certain number, and then that thing slowly just climbs, just not much, but over time. And it's like, I guess what I'm asking is, do a lot of people get too caught up in this idea, like if my zone 2 ride has to be 130, everything has to be 130, and then like or it's not a success? Because to me, that's like holding back or what I mean, trying to be too perfect.
There's always going to be a range of success, I think for any given workout. And that's why, like, anytime we ever like pre-structure or build a workout it always has ranges, not specific, like, targets, is because, like in most of your zones, like if you have them appropriately dialed in, like in Training Peaks or a format you use, is going to have a pretty broad range. Like a zone 2 might be like, 26, 27 watts difference, so you have that whole range to work with.
Right. So how do you handle that?
But even when you hop on the bike, like you don't hop in straight trying to go for that range. Like when I hop on, I don't even like look. I just kind of like get my legs loose and to kind of figure out what I have today, because then I just want to figure out where I'm even going to fit in that range. Like I don't even start. I'm not like, oh, I got to. Let's say my range for the day in my zone 2, according to your settings and your zones, is like 180 to 204, right? Let's say that's your equivalent of an easy ride for the day. Well, I don't immediately hop on the bike and just like, I've got to go straight to 180 and to be in that zone. I'm like, the first 10 minutes are insignificant. You're getting to understand what you even really have for the day. Do you have a 200 watt average ride, or do you have a 179 and a half ride and you're just kind of stuck and be like, I ain't got it today, which is a huge difference in not just RPE, but watts, obviously, but no, I always, and this is the same thing I tell athletes in racing. Like when I give you let's say I give you a watt range of like 200 to 210, for your average or normalized, I don't expect you to stay between 200 and 210 the entire time. It's almost impossible, especially if you have like your power settings based on like power threes or something, you're seeing like instant changes, like, every single minute. Plus power ratings aren't always perfect over, milliseconds. So you could be coasting or different pressure on points on the pedal. It's like, I just want you to end up there. I just want, again, going back to the summary of the session, I want the summary to end up within that range somewhere. And to me, again, if your range is like 180 to 205, if you ended up at 180 or you ended up at 205, the workout's a success. You don't give better kudos to the 205 person than you would the 180 person, because you both fulfilled the requirements of the workout. But as a coach, what you have to look at deeper was that 180 workout where, was our heart rate really low, so they kept it really, really, really easy? And if they did, then you might ask like, hey, I saw your heart rate was much lower, so your RPE and your effort level had to be, much lower than you're used to, having. Why was the power of this? Not that you did anything wrong. You just have to want a better understanding of like, and they might say, oh, well, my legs felt great today. I just didn't have, like, I was distracted. I was taking work calls. You get that right now. Everything is being virtual or remote. And it's like, you get that people are multitasking, or it's like, I was trying to teach my kid, e-learning, while I was on my bike, or I was playing chess with my kid while I'm on the bike. Like, I've had that comment before. Like, that's what you have to ask, because you want to figure out the whole story. On the flip side, if the athlete was like 205 and their heart rate was like much higher, and you could tell they were working really, really hard to get that last number to be like, I hit the top of the top, right? I hit the ceiling of the range you gave me. You want to be like, hey, I saw where you hit 205. Like, it looks like a pretty good workout, but your heart rate was much higher than normal. What were you trying to, and they'll probably say, I just really wanted to hit that higher number today. And that's when you'd be like, hey, I get that, all good. Don't worry about it. But just so you know, 195, 190 would have been the same.
I guess what I'm asking is that if it is 180 to 210, say the range or whatever, like, do we get it in our head that if it has to land in the middle of that what?
It doesn't have to land in the middle.
Well, it doesn't?
Can land anywhere and still be a success.
Okay. So I guess what I'm saying is that is there something in a zone 2 ride that if you have a target, say in the middle, say it's in the middle, it doesn't have to be, but like just to be right on that number, to me, that doesn't feel like a zone 2 ride necessarily. It feels like a pressure ride. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like,
you're trying to meet an expectation.
Right. Yeah. Like if you're trying to nail something like consistently across the whole hour or whatever it is, it's like, man, that's why that doesn't feel like a free ride to me.
Well, it's never a free ride. I mean, like most people, when you see them do that, it's because they have their smart trainer built in like to ERG mode. So it just like standard 205 watts the entire time. I hate it. I know I'm grumpy, but whatever.
Oh, see,
it drives me nuts because I'm like, you don't feel what you're doing. You didn't decide what to do. Your bike trainer did it for you. Somebody made from across the world. Like, oh, I'm 205 today. Really? Are you? Are you sure you weren't 203? And if you are sure, then tell me how you know, because you don't. For some sessions you might think it's like if you just like disassociate your brain and not worry about it. For a lot of them, like you need to engage your brain and your body together and that pair to understand what you have and what you don't have. And then also like the acceptance of like, not like every day I read an athlete with their trainer stuck in some like automatic mode that can't fulfill a workout because it got stuck in some like super high gear. And I'm like, what's wrong with like spinning? Why can't you just get back and spin easy? I don't understand. Like I don't understand what the rocket science is behind that or why it actually takes longer to set up, whatever. But no, it shouldn't feel, your workouts shouldn't feel like I'm fulfilling obligation or fulfilling a requirement. It should be what your body has today should be the success story, not the meeting of an expectation or again, like a requirement on what was in there should be the end all be all. Like, and even going like and again, like if you're trying to find yourself within a range, like just end up there, right? Because you're still going to get largely the same stimulus. If your goal is to, average 180 and you spend a lot of your time at either 170 or 190, you're going to end up at 180. Your MP is going to be a little bit higher, but it's like, where do you want to end up? Like if you're doing 30 real short intervals, like, 30-second minute intervals, and you want to end up at like the 350 range, right? You want to end up at a 350 average. So you might start out at 300 to kind of really get things going. And for the last 10 seconds, you might smash it and go and raise it up from a 310 average to a 350 average. But in order to do that, you had to push 400 or 410 to get it to that average. But you don't know what you have until you get moving. And that's part of, those doing those repetitions and those intervals and getting to know your body and what these, metrics feel like too. Like after a while, like everyone should do this with their watch or like with their bike. The first 5-10 minutes of every workout, everyone should guess. Like cover up your screen. What am I pushing today? This feels about 180. If you look and you see it's like 190, you're like, oh, today's going to be a good day. As long as your heart rate is, is reciprocating the same thing, it's like the same way it always is. Or if you're like, I'm probably pushing like 180, looking out, it's like 165, you're like, maybe you need to warm up a little bit more. I may just want to have it today, and that's your answer. Same thing goes to running. Don't even look at it. I don't even look at my watch anymore till like 2 or 3 miles in because it doesn't matter because I'm really probably not going to be who I am at mile 1 anyway. And so then I look back and I'm like, oh, that feels about right. That my watch is matching what my intent is and how I feel. It doesn't mean it's wrong or right or too fast or too slow. It just means it matches. And that's, I think it's a good exercise for everybody to do in terms of getting to know things. There's also an exercise I do a lot with athletes. And I'm like, hey, walk to your front door, start your watch, leave it on your doorstep and go run for 40 minutes.
Okay.
And then when you come back, see what the time says. Oh, well, coach, I'm not going to know how far I went, or I'm not going to get the data, and I'm not going to know exactly what, show me that you know yourself and what time feels like and effort feels like, because it's not just a time equation, it's also an effort equation because you're also moving a certain distance at a certain pace and going a certain time. And it's always interesting to watch athletes come back after like 21 minutes or 55 minutes. You're like, you're way off. Like your understanding of your body and the stress and, and being present or the whole thing. It's a good, those are all good exercises to do, I think, for every athlete, just to really hone in on who you are as an athlete, but then just to hone on it every day and be like, I get that, and then accepting that, what, that's probably right. I knew I didn't feel great today. And it's kind of like a wake up call, and it should be, to a lot of it should be a relief. Like, you're right. I don't have it today. Or I do have it today and I feel incredible. And this is going to be a great workout. It's kind of nice to have that affirmation, either that you feel great or that affirmation that you don't feel great, or that you may, your want and your willpower to do a workout doesn't necessarily match what your body wants to do.
Man, I sometimes you got to let go of the rope, man. And I think that's the only way you really, truly understand it. And I was talking about controlling your race, and that means you have a great understanding of your body and your effort and things like that, because this is a world where I don't know how many times I've joined an online class or watched a video on how to do something, and you can do that. To me, that's the equivalent of a watch. If you're running and you want to stay at a 8:30 pace, and you can just watch it, but can you understand what an 8:30 pace means, or the effort for that, like intrinsically in your body? Do you really understand it? Because if you watch a video about how to do something online, yeah, you can walk your way through it or following instructions or whatever, but are you really learning and embedding that understanding inside of you that you can do it again, 2 months later without watching that video again? And I think that's sort of what the watch can be sometimes, is sort of like you or the numbers, and you depend on that so hard that you never build that kind of connection between your feel and your understanding your body, just to be able to do it without it. And without instructions, so to speak, because to me, that's real learning. And that's just something we have to do on occasion. The idea of leaving your watch on a porch is like, man, that's a scary idea. But like, if you ran out and you could come back in exactly 40 minutes or right around then, that would be showing something, right? Because you always think you're running further than you were, probably.
Almost always.
Yeah.
Exercise.
But it's possible. For real, you can, when I'm really in a groove and training, because I've always been sort of a chrono guy, and a lot of times I just start the watch and I'm just looking at time, and a lot of times I don't look at it, but I know exactly. I can almost this is something I do a lot, is like I'll be out running what I think is 30 minutes, and I'll look, it's probably about 30 minutes, and it's like 29, 30, or just like I sort of develop that sense, and I think it's an important sort of sixth sense about training, to really kind of not have to see the mile markers and just really sort of know where you're going. That's a deep understanding of racing, really.
Oh yeah.
When you, I think I said it last year, that was the first time I really felt in control when I did Chat 70.3. I wasn't even like, man, I wish that mile would come up, I was just sort of coming up on the mile. And to me, that meant that I wasn't obsessing about like how far I had to go and things like that. I was more in tune with what was going on in the race and in my body. And it was just sort of taking care of itself. And to me, that's a massive advantage.
It's also, and we can close on this one, it's also, I think, a great skill to have because it allows you to know when you can pull the trigger and when you can't. Like to understanding how much really longer it takes and how long it's going to take you to cover a distance at what speed, at what effort. That's how you really calculate when you pull it. Like the most proud runs, the proudest I am after runs aren't really ever, and maybe not proud is ever the right word, but like the happiest thumping I am usually, definitely not thumping, is when I go, I'm like, yeah, I got an hour and a half run today. Mm-hmm. And I go out and I'm not a guy that plots their course. Like that's not me. I'm like, I think if I about run to this location and then maybe back and take this one, that'll get me to this point in around an hour and a half. And when I nail it around like a minute, I'm like, I felt good today. Like, because I knew my body and the effort, and because it's not just time and effort, it's also the speed in which you're going and the amount of ground you're going to cover. So when it comes to racing and you're thinking, oh, I've got 10 minutes or 15 minutes, it's like, okay, that's time, but it's like, what effort is going to take me to reach that certain speed over this specific terrain to get me to the finish line before I am trashed. You know, it's like, it's a huge skill to learn, and it comes with time. And if you talk to athletes, like the longer you're in the sport, the more you just run or you ride on feel, and you just know, like you get really in tune with your body. And I think it's a skill that every athlete should have and should work on continuously, especially as we continue to, gravitate more towards, technology and Zwift and Trainer Road and all these like, data filled gadgets that we've become, we just don't look. And even you look at Daytona, like a lot of people are like, I thought I was going to do this thing. I just kind of like, forget it. I'm not even going to look at it. I'm just going to do this, or take the guy on the Tour de France who won the entire tour coming from second, didn't even take a power meter with him on the final day in the TT. He wasn't even on his bike. He was like, why does it matter? I'm going to win or I'm not going to win, but I'm going to give it what I have for the day. I'm going to go for broke. And he ended up beating the guy by like a minute or something. Like you just got to know. And it takes time. But in order to do it, you have to be willing to put yourself in situations to where you might figure out that you don't know. And those are always kind of uncomfortable sessions, but they're also great learning experiences.
You got to take away that Texas Instrument calculator once in a while.
The old TI 490.
Ooh, that thing was special.
Yeah, kind of like my music taste. As usual, we love you. We appreciate you as always. We hope you enjoyed today's cast. I did. If you haven't, or you haven't been in a while, or you want to, and you've been putting it off, go to our website, C26Triathlon.com. It is our one-stop shop for all things coaching, camps, and community. And it is where we have our club membership that Mike is handling. That'll be available just through the end of this year. You can click on the coaching tab, scroll down 3 spots, click on the club membership, and Mike will tell you all about that right now.
The club is really taking on a good vibe, and there's a lot of really cool people in there, and it's growing. And we've been, talking in the Facebook group. I've been communicating through Training Peaks to get to know everybody. And basically what we're going to do is look at your next year calendar, 21 season. You're going to plot your races, and we're going to design your plan all around your races. And we're going to take away the worry and the anxiety around what's coming next and how to taper and how to be ready for, your Olympic, and then also turn the gears and then do the marathon or the full or half or whatever you have planned, or Olympics or sprints. It doesn't matter. Beginners, veterans, they're all in there, and they're all cool people. And it's a great community. So check it out at our website. And if you got any questions about it, you can email me, crushingiron@gmail.com.
If you have any questions for me about anything, C26coach@gmail.com.
And is that it? Do we got anything else?
No, I'm just going to go, turn on my Michael Bolton and jam out for the rest of the day.
Here we go.
Kenny G, baby.
All right, man. Well, I look forward to listening to that all day.
We'll see you on Monday.
All right, man. See you.